Welcome everyone to A Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. Today we have a wonderful guest, Professor Richard Dawkins. I'm your host, Larry Mendoza.
And I'm Rick Wingrove.
And I just, before we get into our discussion with Richard here, I would like to remind all of our viewers out there to check us out on YouTube and Facebook. We want ideas for shows. We want this to be a collaborative effort of our atheist community to get involved in media and your local media. I know there's a lot of national things going on, but I think it's important that we also focus on the local stuff. So anyways, having said that, let's get right into a discussion with Richard here. One of the questions that I have is that there's been some criticism regarding your theory of the selfish gene, right? And what I want to know is, can you really describe the difference between on how natural selection works on genes as opposed to individuals? Because I understand that's been a lot of contention, and not just from recent criticism, but also from past biologists as well.
Yeah, they never get it. They're both true. It's just different senses of what it works on. Natural selection works on genes in the sense that it's genes that change in frequency in gene pools as the generations go by. So the actual course of evolution is the change in the frequency of some genes. Some get more frequent, others get less frequent in the species gene pool. But the way in which they become more frequent or less frequent is by the survival and reproduction of individual bodies, which I call the vehicles of the genes. So at any one time, the genes are not sloshing about in a pool. They're actually in the bodies of individuals, or in the sperms or eggs of individuals, passing from one generation to the next. And so the way genes become more frequent in the gene pool is by being good at building bodies. Good at building bodies which I call survival machines, to preserve them and pass them on in the act of reproduction. So both the gene and the individual are units of natural selection, but in a different sense. One is the replicator and one is the vehicle.
That's interesting, yeah.
Somebody, I read somewhere that part of the criticism is that these genes that do contribute, that are passed on, are only part of a package of genes. But it seems like the life-threatening things, the things that cause death, those, like disease, those only affect certain things, certain of those genes. The others are relatively moot in those packages. Do I understand that correctly?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
Well, there's a whole lot of genes that come with a survivor, not necessarily just the ones that allowed you to survive a disease.
Well, of course.
But the others, like male pattern baldness.
Okay, I mean, there may be some genes that are neutral with respect to survival, probably fewer than you think, actually. There are mutations which are neutral with respect to the pre-mutation version, because they have exactly the same effect. It's like changing the font on your computer from Times to Geneva. It still means the same thing, so that kind of mutation has no effect at all. Right. But something like male pattern baldness, you might be surprised what a big effect something like that has. J.B.S. Haldane, the great geneticist, did a calculation for really, really trivial characters. And he made it as trivial as he could by saying, let's suppose it makes only a 1 in 1,000 difference. And then he did the calculation. How long would it take for such a trivially significant gene to pass from being virtually, I mean, just 1% in the population to being 99% in the population? And the answer was, it would be so quick that it wouldn't be detectable on the geological time scale. The human mind is very bad at estimating the odds. We're very bad at doing the sort of actuarial calculations for genes.
Yeah, and that's interesting because you recently visited Janelli Farm, HHMI, and Sean Carroll, who's the vice president for HHMI, did a talk on evolution and talking about how genes and alleles in a population, how quickly that actually happens. And you're right, people don't really grasp
the
idea that, in a few hundred generations of pocket mice, for example, in the Midwest, in the desert, can change from a complete brown color to a complete black, depending on their environment. In that case, specific example was volcanic eruptions that then
made black.
Yes. So
Ledyard Stebbins, the great botanist of the Neo-Darwinian synthesis, did another calculation, similar one. He said, suppose you get a mouse-like animal, and you have a very, very weak selection pressure pushing it to get larger and larger and larger and larger. And you make the selection pressure so weak that it's impossible to detect by ordinary ecological field trapping methods of these little mice. Nevertheless, there is this relentless, slow pressure to get bigger. Right. How long would it take for these mouse-like animals to grow to the size of elephants? Right. And the answer, again, I think it was only about 12,000 generations. Again, too short to detect on the geological timescale. It would look like an instant on the geological timescale.
Especially in a small mammal like a mouse.
Yeah. And likewise, you know, certain genes, like for example, I'm sure you're familiar with the ice fish in the southeast, and they lost the gene for hemoglobin, and it goes the other way. And so I think there's a misunderstanding in the public on how evolution actually works, that you know, you can also lose functionality of genes, but that's beneficial. It's actually a good thing. And the ice fish is a prime example. They don't need hemoglobin to carry oxygen throughout their body, which is something that was, a vertebrate that doesn't have hemoglobin? What is this? But you can still find a fossilized gene of the hemoglobin gene in those fish.
You don't literally mean fossilized, you mean it's still there in the genome as a pseudogene.
It's still there, except it's so mutated and so broken up, but you can clearly see that at
it's
one
like
time.
your hard disk. Your hard disk is littered with dead versions of various documents you've been working on. It's just that they've been, the pointers to them are no longer there.
Exactly. And speaking of that, I do have another question. I've recently been reading a book by Nicholas Wade, and it's called The Faith Instinct, How Religion Evolved and Why It Endures. And I think that's an interesting topic. And we recently had Andy Thompson on our show, who's a trustee for the Richard Dawkins Foundation here. And he talked a lot about the evolution of religion. And he recommended I read this book, and so I started reading it. But I was surprised to see that he has a little bit of criticism, mentions you and also Steven Pinker. And he says that you argue that religious behavior is non-adaptive, okay, but a byproduct of other brain modules, where he seems to think that religious belief is actually an evolutionary. It is adaptive because we see it in almost every culture for the last 2,000 generations or so. So I guess the question is, it's at its core, it's about group selection versus individual selection. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Well, it doesn't have to be about that, but it's certainly true that every culture that's been looked at has something that you could call religion. Not every individual does, but every culture does. So in that sense, it is a human universal. But that doesn't in itself mean it has to have survival value. The byproduct theory is perfectly capable of coping with that. What the byproduct theory says is that religion is a byproduct of a psychological predisposition, which probably does have survival value. So the psychological predisposition could be, say, a tendency to obey authority, or a tendency to believe what your parents tell you, which could very well have survival value in a child, for instance. I mean, you better believe what your parents tell you when they say, don't go too near the cliff edge, or don't pick up that snake, because you don't get a second chance. So the survival value of obeying your parents, believing your parents, is very clear. Now that has the side effect that if your parents tell you some rubbish, like you got to sacrifice to a goat at the time of the full moon or something, then you believe that too. How could you not? How could the child's mind know which bits of parental advice are wise and which bits are just superstition that are passed down through generations? So the byproduct theory is perfectly capable of handling the fact that it's a universal. Now you bring in group selection. I wouldn't call it group selection. It's certainly true that some religions could easily make a group survive better than other religions. Say a religion that preaches war, that preaches life after death, that says if you die a martyr's death, you go straight to paradise. That might very well give your soldiers courage, which might indeed spread your religion by warfare. It's a kind of group selection, but it's not really what's normally meant by group selection. It's almost more like the ecological replacement of one species by another. The grey squirrel replaced the red squirrel in England when it was introduced. For some reason, the grey squirrel survives better in England. The American grey squirrel survives better than the native red squirrel. That's what this displacement of one religion by another is like.
Well, and there you touched on the cultural pressures that affect evolution, I guess, at least at a cultural level. War and say things like the Inquisition will create more of a tendency to believe, I would think.
Well, yes, the penalty for apostasy is death. That's pretty good survival value.
But does that, how many generations before that starts affecting your genetics or your epigenetics even?
I wouldn't like to say about that. I think we're talking about two different things there.
Right. Notice too, in the paper this week, off on a slight tangent, Kansas is now trying to pass a law to ban the teaching of evolution in the public schools. It was in the paper a couple of days ago. State of Kansas is suing to ban the teaching of evolution because evolution is a belief equals religion and should not be taught in schools. This is perverse in the extreme.
This is, are you sure it's the state of Kansas, not some individual senator or something?
As I understand it, and I could be corrected, but I'm pretty sure it is the state of Kansas or the school board or something. And they forget about Edwards v. Aguilar in 1987, which outlawed the teaching of creationism in public schools.
Well, never mind about that. They forget the simply scientific truth. I mean, I was privileged to go around the Jamelia Farms. It's a fantastic institute. I mean, right cutting edge. It must be one of the most exciting research establishments in the world. The United States is without any doubt the leading scientific nation in the world. Just think how much more ahead it would be if it didn't have to cope with things like the state of Kansas holding it back.
And Louisiana and Texas.
Yes. I mean, how you guys manage to be so good at science when you have this sort of handicap, this great burden on your backs.
You know, speaking on that, actually it's interesting because I think the last statistics I read, most postdoctoral students in this country, I think it's up to 60% now, are foreign nationals that come here to study.
Okay.
And only 40% are actual American citizens. And that's interesting to me. And actually that statistic kind of, I think it's pretty close at Jamelia Farm as well. It's a very diverse place, which makes it great. But it's interesting to me, why is it that most Americans are now not getting into science the way they used to? It seems to me there's some kind of, almost like, you know, getting into science is almost like, well, it doesn't pay anything and it's not worth anything, and so I'd rather be, you know, most biology majors these days are pre-meds, pre-dental, you know, pre-vet and things like that. So I find that interesting, why that is. And as you said, it kind of ties into that, you know, imagine where we would be if we actually cherished and respected scientific rationale in this country.
Yes, that's very sad. I mean, you go into science not because it pays, not because it's useful, but because it's wonderful. Right. It is simply astounding how much is now known and how much there is yet to know, which is even more exciting. A life devoted to understanding science, to doing research in science, to reading about science, is a life thoroughly well spent, because it's the most astonishing thing that we now understand in principle where we came from, why we exist, the history of life on this planet, the history that's given rise to us, that's given rise to our big brains, which are capable of understanding the whole process. I mean, isn't that an enthralling thing?
I think it's
and how could anybody not want to do that?
Right.
Yeah, and it points to a huge and apparently growing division in our culture. And it's not hard to point to religion, obviously, as the source of this division. People who absolutely refuse to acknowledge the validity of a process for figuring out what's true in the universe.
Yes.
How can you get past that? And there's a new emphasis on the STEM courses: science, technology, engineering, and math. And so there are people talking about it.
Yeah, and actually in this country right now, I know there are some organizations, some nonprofits that are popping up, one of them being a friend of mine, Jason Osborne. You met him at Jamelia Farm and gave you a tour of the instrument design and fabrication. And what he is doing are things like citizen science projects, where there's this, I think, this divide in the American intellect where you know, they think you need to be a scientist to actually do science, but you don't have to. You know, there's a lot of things you can do, and the example I give is this PaleoQuest, where they actually go out and they collect samples of soil from different strata, put them in little kits, and send them to high schools and say, look for a fossil. And they have found, new fossils that, they've never seen before, shark teeth, and each little bit of that adds to the, knowledge that we have.
Yes.
I mean, so I think that's a growing thing: STEM education, citizen science. And along those lines, is there anything, do you know if there's anything like that going on in England? Or
well, what I was going to say was that not only do you not have to be a scientist in order to do science, you don't actually have to look for fossils either. I mean, a good analogy would be music. You can appreciate music without learning to play an instrument. You don't actually have to do five-finger exercises in order to appreciate music, and even to be quite knowledgeable about music. You can be an expert music critic, like I think Bernard Shaw was, without actually being able to play the violin. And there should be science appreciation as well as actually science doing. You don't actually have to do the Bunsen burner in order to appreciate science.
Right, right.
So does this division in America, this fascination with creationism, does that look as crazy in Europe and in England as it does here?
We have a bit less of it. It's of course even worse in the Islamic world, and that's a big problem in Britain. We've got a great Muslim influence in Britain, and it is even more influential because politicians bend over backwards to suck up to the Muslim vote.
Right.
And so my colleague Steve Jones at University College London actually has medical students walking out of his lectures, boycotting his lectures because he's talking about evolution. So it's a problem. It's more of a problem in the Islamic community in Britain. In general, in Western Europe at least, it's not that much of a problem.
We want to talk about Muslims. You've had some recent experience with this. It's fascinating to me. I want to talk about that. But first, we actually have a phone call from Jeff in Bristow, Virginia. Jeff, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
You have a question for Dr. Dawkins?
Yes, it's a great privilege to talk to you, Professor Dawkins. I want to ask you a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The question I want to ask is sort of one of the biggies, I guess, abiogenesis, about abiogenesis. Can you speak a little bit about where obviously there's a number of different theories, or perhaps better said, hypotheses out there at this point. Can you speak about which hypothesis seems to be the most prevailing at this point, your opinion?
What we're talking about here is the origin of the process of evolution. Once evolution by natural selection gets going, then you're away, and then you go through bacteria and eukaryotic cells, protozoa, multicellular animals, all the different phyla and so on. That's easy. We kind of in principle understand that. But how did it all start? How did you get from non-living to living? The key event that had to have happened was the origin of the first self-replicating entity, equivalent to a gene, equivalent to DNA. It wouldn't have been DNA, almost certainly, because DNA is what's been called a high-tech replicator, requiring a superstructure largely based in protein, and you can't sort of get specified protein without DNA, or without something like DNA. So that's a bit of a catch-22. Various suggestions have been made, as you say, for what might have been the first replicator. The most fashionable at the moment, and one which seems pretty promising, is that it might have been RNA. RNA is similar to DNA in most respects, and it also is capable of self-replicating in the way that DNA is, though not so well. But what RNA can also do is what protein does, which is act as an enzyme, a catalyst. The whole of biological chemistry depends upon specific enzymes. You could imagine the cell as a great big vat filled with chemicals, which potentially could be reacting with each other, but they're not. And they're not until a specific enzyme is present, which catalyzes a particular reaction out of all the hundreds of reactions that could be going on. So it's all done by enzymes. Protein is a brilliant enzyme. Proteins are brilliant enzymes. DNA is a lousy enzyme. That's why you need both, a partnership of both. RNA is moderately good at both things. So RNA is a moderately good replicator, and it's a moderately good enzyme, or can be a moderately good enzyme. So the suggestion is something along the lines that originally it was RNA which was the self-replicating molecule, and it also did the job of being the enzyme. And then later, the function of replication was usurped by DNA, and the function of catalysis was usurped by protein, and RNA remains playing very important mediating roles in the whole process.
Jeff, that was a great question, and I want to also mention, I think it was Thomas Cech, he was a Nobel laureate and also former president of HHMI. I think he did a lot of work on RNA and its enzymatic activity, I believe. But,
yes.
But yeah, absolutely, that was a great question. Do you have anything else for us, Jeff? He's gone?
I think Jeff's gone.
All right.
But what is the current state of understanding in abiogenesis? My most recent reading, that was, okay, they had talked about certain key reactions that were necessary, and they've been closing in on those one at a time.
Yeah, I think we've done enough on that.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
So let's go back and actually talk about your experience. I believe last night you met with ex-Muslims, I believe, was it?
This is a very important thing. There are in the United States a fair number of people of Muslim origin who have escaped and who feel somewhat beleaguered, somewhat threatened, I mean literally threatened, and who wanted to get together to compare notes, to talk to each other, to recognize each other, and possibly to offer help and assistance to those people who are still in Muslim countries who have left their religion, who have given it up. As you know, in Islam, the official penalty for apostasy, for giving up Islam, is death.
Is death, right.
Great way of preserving the religion. I mean, natural selection could hardly have designed a more efficient method.
Pretty much where Christianity was 700 years ago.
Well, they've got a way to go, that's right. Yeah. And so these people are genuinely in danger, and they're in danger, if not of death, of being whipped, etc. My foundation, the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, and several other foundations like CFI and the Secular Coalition for America, various others, got together to meet with the leaders of these Muslim groups, plus a whole lot of the sort of rank and file American ex-Muslims, to talk about problems. We had a very, very fruitful, very, very constructive meeting. We were there mostly to listen, and it was a revelation, and I think these people deserve every encouragement, and we're going to be trying to raise funds for them. So it's quite difficult raising funds because people are scared.
Right, right, absolutely.
We do need to raise funds for them.
This looks like the first trickle of an avalanche, though.
I hope so. I mean, it'd be nice to think that there'd be a tipping point at yes.
So.
Yeah, it sounds like almost something like the Clergy Project, which the Richard Dawkins Foundation supports.
Yes.
But maybe with a different.
Well, there are similarities. The Clergy Project is about clergymen, clergywomen who have lost their faith and become atheists. In their case, they're not threatened with death,
right?
But they're threatened with losing their livelihood, threatened with losing their family,
everything,
losing their friends, and so we helped to set up. Indeed, we did set up a website. Where in strict confidentiality, these clergy could get together, cry on each other's shoulders, whisper in each other's ears, so to speak, over the internet, and gradually, one by one, come out, as a few of them now have, and we hope many more will in the future.
You know,
I mean, there are about 300 of them now, of these American clergy who have now become atheists.
Yes, I find that number astonishing, but I think they too, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, it's the tip of the iceberg. It's not that astonishing when you think that, well, why would you believe it in the first place? I mean,
right, well, of course. Which reminds me about the Good News Club, and you, like us, I believe, don't believe in teaching children below a certain age religion. How do we take our schools back from these groups?
I mean, I'm particularly exercised about labeling children with the religion of their parents, which I think is really wicked. I think we should be teaching children about religion. I think children should be taught that religion exists, the different religions, what they believe, the fact that so many wars, especially in Europe, have been fought over religion, So that, I think, is important. What's really wicked is indoctrinating children in one particular religion just because it happens to be the religion of their parents.
Right.
The Good News Club is a particularly pernicious example of this. It's a nationwide club which invades schools, ducking under the radar of the constitutional separation of church and state by saying it's an out-of-school activity. So they wait until the school bell rings for the end of school in the afternoon, and then they pounce. They go in there, they march into the classroom, they have candy, they have all sorts of coloured literature and things. The children think this is just another lesson. They think they're teachers. They are not teachers. It's just as though they were the chess club or the stamp collecting club or something. But it's the Jesus Club.
Exactly.
And they are indoctrinating children and persuading children to, in effect, bully other children and say, you don't believe in Jesus, right, you're going to hell. These children, there was a child of Jewish parents who was told by her schoolfellows, taught to do so by the Good News Club, that she was going to hell because she didn't believe in Jesus.
I mean, that's bullying. I mean, that's essentially big-time bullying.
Of the worst kind.
And
well, this is the Good News Club. It's an extremely wicked organization. And there's a wonderful book by Catherine Stewart of that title, which I strongly recommend. It really takes the lid off the Good News Club in a big way.
We had a representative from and I forget her name. Do you recall her name? I'm so bad.
Yeah, I can't remember.
But we actually had a guest on about that a couple of months ago, and you're right, pernicious is a very nice way to say it. But evil, I think, is a better way.
Well, I mean, I think that's they know how to abuse the system, or not, well, abuse the system, use the system, because after school, if it's a student-led club, then they have to, under freedom of speech, allow them to go ahead and have like prayer clubs and things like that. I think the difference with this Good News Club, I think they're actively going to schools and starting this, which I think that may get them in trouble constitutionally. But what they're trying to do is turn it into a student-led thing, and then that's okay. We have to let them do that. Through Beltway Atheists Incorporated, I'm the director for educational outreach, and I do go to high schools sometimes and give a talk on creationism versus evolution, but it has to be after school, after hours, and it has to be through a club, a free thinkers club. And I'm glad that they're actually popping up now in high schools as opposed to just in college.
Yeah, mind you, that's science what you're talking.
Yes.
Right. But they are making it difficult. There are schools which just have no intention of complying and have resisted the pressure. But we have both spoken in schools about these things. And
actually, and it was very bad because this one school, we were trying to get in to give a talk and start an actually free thinkers club at this another local high school in Loudoun County. The principal made it so difficult, and the student that wanted to start the group was still sort of in the closet, so to speak, and didn't want his mom to know that he was an atheist. Well, the principal knew this and called his parents and told them, hey, your son, what he wants to do, and that killed that. So they're just, they're playing dirty.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate.
It's okay to play dirty if you're doing it for Jesus.
Right.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It's okay to lie if you're doing it for Jesus too.
Right. We're going to need to take a break right now, so we'll be back in about 3 minutes.
There's an alarming trend in the world today. Everywhere you go, people are saying that cinema is dead. But cinema is not dead. My name is Count Simon Gauntley, and on my television program, Count Gauntley's Horrors from the Public Domain, I make it my mission to resurrect forgotten film classics. I promise to dredge the sewers and ford the stagnant streams of film history to ensure that no film is truly lost to the ages. Count Gauntley and FPA, keeping cinema alive! Alive! Alive!
Hi, we're back with Professor Dawkins. Just to clarify something I talked about a little earlier, it is the state of Kansas. And one sentence here caught my attention. It said, state of Kansas is fighting the teaching of evolution in public schools. It says here, scientists who support the idea of intelligent design, ... That's just a crazy statement on its face.
How can you be a scientist to support intelligent design? It's just not science.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, actually.
I mean, there is one way it could be science. Would be if intelligent design was done by aliens from outer space. That's about it. I once said that on a program that turned out to be a television program that turned out to be a front for creationism. And immediately the host of the program, who was some idiot whose name I forget, said, "Wait a minute, Dawkins believes in little green men." And what I was saying, in fact, I actually was being very generous to intelligent design, because what he asked me was, could I imagine any circumstances in which intelligent design could be true? And I knew that the intelligent design people pretend not to be religious sometimes. They pretend that they're just looking for intelligent design. It could come from anywhere. It could be from an extraterrestrial intelligence. So I wanted to give them that.
Sure.
But then to point out that if it is an extraterrestrial intelligence, that extraterrestrial intelligence itself has to have some kind of origin. Sooner or later, the regress must be terminated.
Exactly.
Sooner or later, you've got to have something like an evolution process to start from simple beginnings, to give rise to something complex enough to be capable of designing. Design doesn't just happen. It needs a brain or something equivalent to a brain. We have human designers who design planes and cars and ships, and they have the capacity to do it because they've got a brain which has evolved by natural selection. We may have been designed by an extraterrestrial intelligence, although I gravely doubt it. But if we have, then they needed a designer, and they need a designer. And finally, you can't have a designer. You've got to have evolution, or something that is explicable.
Well, it's God, right? I mean, you know, that's
not a theory. That's not a theory.
It's not a theory, which points to science again. Saw somewhere years ago that if God exists, science will prove it. Religion won't prove it. Religion can't prove the sky is blue. It's not what they do. So,
yeah.
Well, how would you respond? I mean, I think the idea of intelligent design is being propagated, and a lot of people are accepting it in this country because there are actual bona fide scientists.
Are there?
Well, for example, Michael Behe. Right?
He's one.
Right. Okay, there's one. But he's enough to convince people that are illiterate in science, because, you know, especially since they have a predisposition to believe that, you know, in God or whatever. And then you have now a scientist telling him, well, I have, you know, scientific proof that things are designed. You know, how that's, I think, a problem that we are seeing here in this country. How would you respond to someone even like, or to, how do we as atheists fight that?
The first thing to say is that Michael Behe believes in evolution. He just needs a little bit of intelligent design to get it over some of the difficult jumps.
I see.
So he's not a sort of one-off six-day creationist, which I think would disappoint probably a lot of people who think that they've got Michael Behe on their side. Second thing is that they're extremely rare. I mean, I could quote much more extreme examples of scientists with PhDs. I mean, it's not that difficult to get a PhD, you know, especially in certain universities, and in certain subjects. They often have PhDs in subjects that are not relevent.
What are some of those easy PhD?
Marine engineering, or some PhD in so-and-so Bible college or something like that.
Now we're going to get a lot of letters from marine engineers.
Okay, well, that just happens to be one prominent creationist who's very proud of his PhD in marine engineering. But I could quote far more extreme examples of scientists who clearly are not to be taken seriously. The best example I know is the professor of astronomy at Oxford told me of an American astronomer who publishes learned papers in astronomical journals, mathematical papers, and his mathematical papers all assume that the universe is 14 billion years old, which it approximately is. Yet he privately believes the universe is only 6,000 years old. So he fraudulently writes astronomical papers. Nice. I mean, well, okay, maybe not fraudulently. Maybe he just got a split brain, and that he can simultaneously do the astrophysical calculations that assume that the universe is 14 billion years old, and at the same time, privately, in his heart of hearts, believe it's only 6,000 years old. So it is possible.
That is some weapons-grade compartmentalization.
It is,
right
really
there.
is, yes.
Yeah, and that's another thing in science. You know, there are some scientists who are religious. For example, there's plenty of Catholics. I mean, when I was doing my master's work, my advisor was very religious. He was Catholic, but clearly accepted evolution and did some work.
Well, as the Catholic hierarchy do.
Because they're allowed, you know, it's almost like they're allowed to believe, to accept evolution. But, you know, when I was going through that process, you know, I would come up, I would do experiments. She goes, no, you have to have controls. You have to do this. You got, you know, we can't just, you know, do it, you know, incomplete. And at the same time, then she would go to church and accept something completely on faith, without needing that rigorous scientific empirical methodology. And I always wondered how people can do that. The reason why I grew up Catholic, I left the church because mainly because of my understanding of biological sciences and evolution and learning and having an interest in biology. I just don't understand how people can do that, compartmentalize their brain like that.
No, and use the skeptical, critical method when, say, you've got to do proper controls in your experiments, and yet at the same time believe Jesus had a virgin birth.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's unbelievable.
And she knows perfectly well that wouldn't stand up to scientific examination.
I mean, parthenogenesis does happen in some species.
In aphids.
Exactly, yeah.
And in any case, if that were true, Jesus would have been female.
Absolutely, you are correct. So
where were we going to go next?
Well, no, I mean, there's a few things. So one of the things I do want to talk about is there's the Richard Dawkins Foundation. There's so many foundations or organizations, the atheist community here in this country and everywhere, and a lot of them focus, as I said earlier, on kind of like the bigger picture. You know, let's lobby in D.C., let's lobby there. Do you think it's worthwhile? And I believe it is, that we really focus on our own small communities and spread that throughout the country, because I know that's what churches essentially do. They have communities, they build communities, and then they coalesce, and that's, I guess, the secular coalition, I guess, is starting to coalesce these things.
Well, it's our mission statement at Beltway Atheists.
At Beltway Atheists,
and other groups, is to build community first. You got to start there.
Yes, I do believe in sort of grassroots building, and I think it's a very sensible way to do it. It's what churches do,
right.
As you say. And let's do it, yes.
Yes, and I think, you know, even public access TV stations such as this is a great way to get that message across to the community, you know. That's why we started this show here, The Road to Reason, was to kind of spread locally and to have a differing voice of some of the other religious shows that air on public access here. Mm-hmm. And there's not many that I know of. I think the Atheist Experience, I think it's the only other TV show that does this, and I think it's important to spread the message, and not just, you know, donating to foundations like Richard Dawkins Foundation, all these others is great, but you need, I believe in activism, local activism, get in there.
Visible and vocal, whoever you are.
Right.
It is extraordinary. Whenever I go to America, I sometimes flick around the television dials, and everywhere you go, there are more than one televangelist site, these shiny suited con men who stand up spouting nonsense and telling people to give them money so they can spout more nonsense, and it's a sort of self-feeding process. How people don't see through them, I mean, they've got charlatan written all over them,
right.
And you know they're rich, you know that these people have Rolls Royces and Lear
absolutely.
jets.
I mean, what's a recent
Tax-free.
example was, what's his name? He was in the news recently. Oh, I can't remember his name.
Yeah, I forget names.
Big televangelist.
There was the guy out of Fort Worth, Kenneth Copeland.
Copeland, there's one, but there's another one that's right now being criticized because he's making all this money.
And it's tax-free, and they even managed to justify it by saying God wants you to be rich.
Right,
yes. The prosperity doctrine. We're going to do a show about that one of these days.
I mean, I always believe that I think one of the reasons, and this is my opinion, why religion is so rampant and still going in this country, because you have probably the most one of the most extreme forms of capitalism in this country. You mix that with tax-exempt businesses that we call churches, and you have the perfect storm for these people becoming filthy rich, because churches are a business.
I mean, there seems to be no reason why they should be tax-free. I mean, I think that would be a really good campaign to run.
I think there is.
You don't want to shut them down and just makes them pay taxes like everybody else.
Right.
People make noise about that all the time, but it never gets any traction because there is zero motivation for politicians to lean into that.
Politicians think that they need to suck up to the religious lobby, and I wonder whether that's really true.
As our numbers grow, when we show up in numbers to vote.
That's the other thing. I mean, you're already above 20%.
Right.
Which is more than I think any other particular religious denomination apart from Catholics. Is that
Except
right?
for the Catholics, I think that's right.
And yet politicians don't seem to have got that message yet. So they're willing to suck up to all sorts of minority groups, but not this really substantial minority in America, which is the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S.
Right, exactly.
And so I think you need to be more vocal, writing to congressmen and telling them, don't ignore us.
Right. And under 30, the numbers look great. You know, sometimes in our community, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's really frustrating a lot of times, but I think we're actually winning, you know, and of course the internet in the last 20 years, with the occurrence of the internet, I don't know where we would be without that, but we are now enabled. We can find each other, we can talk to each other, and slowly but surely we are building community and we're building traction in Washington.
I think the other point to make is that people may say that they're Christian, but if you actually ask them what they believe, it often turns out that they don't actually believe anything that Christians believe. And we found this in Britain. Perhaps I could say a bit about this. My British foundation, I've got 2 foundations, both called the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. One in Britain, one in America. They've got the same aims and the same name. The British one commissioned a poll of people who in the 2011 census said that they were Christian. So every 10 years Britain has a census, and one of the questions is, are you Christian, Muslim, Jew, etc. In 2001, 72% said they were Christian. In 2011, 54% said they were Christian. Well, that's a great improvement already. But we went further than that. We commissioned a poll, a proper opinion poll by a professional polling company, of those people who ticked the Christian box to see what they really believe. And by any stretch of the imagination, you couldn't really call most of them Christian. They don't believe Jesus, they believe in Jesus, they don't go to church, they don't read the Bible. We even asked them what's the first book of the New Testament. They didn't actually have to say Matthew. They had a 4-way multiple choice. Matthew, Genesis, Acts of the Apostles, and Psalms. Only 39% of the people who call themselves Christian could name Matthew, let alone the people who didn't call themselves Christian.
Very interesting.
When we asked them, why did you tick the Christian box? They didn't say, because I believe Jesus is my Lord and Savior. The majority of them said, the most popular answer was, well, I like to think of myself as a good person.
I see.
That's what we're up against. There are people who think that Christian means good person.
Right.
So we're all good people, so they would call us Christian.
Yeah. And I think...
Now, if you go to America, if you go to American voters and ask them, what do you really believe? Okay, you call yourself Christian, that's because you've been baptized, because your parents are Christian. What do you really believe?
Right.
Do you believe Jesus was born of a virgin?
Well, there's plenty that will say yes, but I think there's just a lot that will say, you know, yeah. I mean, it's you know, talking snakes, you know.
Yeah.
I think in Europe, as you know, we were talking on the ride over here a little bit about I'm from Italy, and I think Italy is starting to become more and more secular, but still people consider themselves Catholic. But it's almost becoming not so much a religion as it is a cultural identity.
Like people who say they're Jews.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing. Yeah. It's becoming like that, and you know, and that's okay because it's essentially secularizing religion, and to the point where it's like, yeah.
No, if you want to have some fun, ask them to name the 10 Commandments. They can usually name don't kill. We have another caller.
Everybody knows thou shalt not kill.
Exactly.
That's
exactly, but that's the
obvious one.
And they don't know about the death penalties for all this stuff.
Yeah, sure.
We have Rob from Richmond on the phone. Rob, can you hear us?
I can. Hey guys, Professor Dawkins, thank you so much for coming in. Andy Thompson said that when you cross Watson and Crick with Charles Darwin, you end up with Richard Dawkins. I'd try to throw in a little Carl Sagan into that mix as well. And I want to know that as a master of metaphor and one of our greatest popularizers of science, you've shown everybody who's interested in learning how to climb the gentle slopes of Mount Improbable, how to unweave the rainbow without destroying its beauty, and the river out of Eden, and all the ignorance that entails. I want to know, what can we do in the atheist and secular community to help spread the good news that science is real, that God probably is, and what, practically speaking, can we do to get more people to embrace the science that you speak about?
Well, thank you for listing my metaphors like that, so I didn't have to.
I plagiarize your work whenever I can.
That's very kind. What can we do? Well, I mean, there are various approaches. I mean, one way I think is just to promote science and reason, which is what my foundation does. Many people are of the view, and I'm kind of half of that view myself, that when people really understand science, religion will just die. It'll just drop away. You don't actually need to propagandize against religion. Religion will just go when science is better understood. But I think there probably is a role to play in pointing out to people the illogicality of religion, and in some cases the ridiculous. I don't want to ridicule individuals, but I think I do want to ridicule some of their beliefs. The British journalist Johann Hari said, "I respect you as a person too much to respect your ridiculous beliefs."
Right.
And I think that's quite a nice way to put it. So if you meet a Roman Catholic, ask him or her whether they really believe that the wafer turns into the body of Christ, literally. I mean, it's not a metaphor, as it is for the Anglican Church, it's literal. Well, they dress it up in Aristotelian terms, like the accidents and the essence, but you can tease them with it. I mean, you can say, "You don't really believe that, do you?" And then they sort of start to shuffle their feet and cough and get embarrassed, because of course they don't believe it.
Right.
But they're supposed to believe it. "You don't really believe Jesus was born of a virgin, do you? You don't really believe Jesus turned water into wine." And many of them admit that they don't. They usually, the sticking point for them usually is the resurrection.
Sure.
And some of them will say, well, if Jesus could pull off the resurrection, there's nothing he couldn't do, and so we might as well believe in turning water into wine.
Right.
But so I think we need a two-pronged attack. I mean, it's promote science, but I think also ridicule the illogicality of religious belief.
Right.
Well, true. And in this country, too, of course, there's promotion of science, but protecting our civil rights is something that is an ongoing effort, because there are people in downtown here that in Washington, D.C., who don't consider any of those things settled except guns. They're fine with that.
Right.
That's permanent, that's forever, that's rock solid, but everything else you got to fight to maintain.
Yeah. In Britain, we don't have the same kind of constitutional issues. We don't have a constitutional separation of church and state, and so we don't march in front of courthouses trying to get the Ten Commandments taken down, or get the "In God We Trust" taken off the money. We do, or at least it did until very recently, have Charles Darwin on our £10 notes. Which
right. Yes, that was beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish we could get that.
Unfortunately, he's going now. I mean, his time is up.
His time is up now. It's time for somebody. Do you know who they're going to put next?
Jane Austen.
Okay.
This was a result of a rather noble feminist campaign, which netted the woman who ran the campaign the most fearful hate mail.
Wow.
I mean, rape threats and all sorts of terrible, just because she wanted to put Jane Austen on the banknotes.
You know, speaking of hate mail, this morning before I came over, I was reading your ugly letters section on your website. Those people are crazy.
Oh, yeah.
There's people that just don't like you, Richard.
Actually, I've found the right way to deal with that sort of hate mail. You don't let it hurt your feelings like some people do. Ridicule it. And I've done a YouTube film which has got a lot of hits.
I've seen that.
Reading my hate mail.
Yes.
We hammed it up. I mean, I think I had a dressing gown on and slippers, and cat on my lap. I don't think I smoked a pipe, right, but there was that sort of thing before a log fire, and I read the hate mail, and the camera crew couldn't resist laughing. They were sort of going.
That was brilliant.
Yeah, but I'm going to do another. Indeed, I've done it now. Another lot of hate mail with a young woman playing the cello. Beautiful. Cello music while I'm reading the hate mail.
Nice.
That hasn't been edited yet, but it'll be up soon.
Yeah, very nice, very nice.
We'll look for that.
Yeah, we definitely will. So you're on a book tour, right? Your latest book is it's a memoir. It's an autobiography in essence, and I'm not sure if we have a picture of that we can pop up on the screen. There it is. Now, I'm curious about just one thing about this. Why is the cover different in the U.S. than it is in
Oh, they always are.
And why is that?
It's
because I love the other cover.
Yeah,
I wish I had that cover.
It's the one thing publishers can do. They love to change the cover.
Okay.
And I don't mind. I mean, I actually quite like both covers.
Sure.
I call the American cover the Grinning Idiot cover, and the British cover I call the Rupert Brooke cover. So sort of sideways poetic look.
Yeah, there it is.
There
There you go. That's
and I'm examining a cricket, which is what I used to do. Do research on.
That's beautiful. So you're on this book tour. Recently, you've been on the Jon Stewart show, I believe. How was that
I
experience?
loved that. It was great fun. A very interesting man, very intelligent man.
Were you aware of him before?
Oh, of course, yes.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
We get him in Britain.
Okay.
And
I saw that, and it didn't appear. It seemed to me like you didn't know who he was for a minute.
Oh no,
okay.
I know full well who he is. I enjoyed it very much. Yes, very interesting. It was better actually after the television program was over, and they had supplementary 2 sections on the internet, which are worth looking
I watched that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
they're rather better actually.
Yes, exactly, and you know, of course, you're going to be going all over the place. Universities this afternoon, I think at 7 o'clock, you are speaking at George Washington University. So anybody out there that would like to head out there at GW.
What time is that?
I think it starts at 7, I believe. I'm not sure, either 6 or 7. I think open doors at 6. The talk starts at 7.
Yes, okay.
Somebody's sent us in a question. In our prison system here, we have a law called RLUPA, Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which allows prisoners to be pretty much furnished with whatever they need to exercise their religion. Is that the same in British jails?
I have no idea, I'm afraid. No, I just don't know. I would think so, yes.
You'd think.
Yeah, the prison system here, there's actually right down the street from Janelia Farm, right down the street from it, there's a place called the Christian Fellowship, or Prison Fellowship. And it's an organization this guy started that he goes into prisons to convert people to Christianity.
Yes. What's the guy's name? It's Chuck Colson of Watergate fame.
Yes. Is it really?
Yes, it really is. It's about 2 blocks away from Howard Hughes.
Yeah.
I think I read actually, yes, that it may be in Britain that a lot of prisoners are flocking to become Christians because they get better privileges if they do that.
Well, that's pretty much the case here because something like 98 or 99% of people in prison appear to at least profess some religion.
Yes.
And maybe that's the reason.
There are very few aitheists in prison.
Very few.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely.
For being spawned of Satan, we seem to be fairly crime-free.
Yeah.
Fairly crime-free. So you're going across. I was going to say GW, you're going to be in Chicago, you're going to the West Coast, but I think, is it October 25th, you're doing Bill Maher?
Yes, Bill Maher's on October 25th.
Is that the first time?
No, I've done him twice before.
Twice before?
Yes,
okay.
I enjoy going to his show very much.
Right, yeah, so everybody, make sure you tune in. That's October 25th show with Bill Maher. And if you guys are around, when he comes to your city or your town, make sure you come and see Richard here give a talk because he does an amazing job. And I've attended a few of the talks,
and buy the book if I can say that.
Yes, buy the book. Buy all his books.
It wasn't for me to say that.
Buy all his books. I mean, most people like in the atheist community, it's they buy the God Delusion. That's the one that everybody loves because it's your big
Yeah, Rob, who just called in, sounds like he just bought The Selfish Gene and is highlighting it in yellow as we speak.
Climbing Mount Improbable is my most underrated book, I think.
Climbing Mount, we should read that. Yeah.
It sells far less than any of the others, and I don't know why. I think it's one of my best.
I think it's, I don't know. And when did you write that? Like, how long ago was that?
1996.
96, okay. Yeah, I think since you've been you know, thrown into the spotlight as so-called the spokesman for atheism, along with the other four, you know, the four horsemen, Dennett, and Harris, and late Christopher Hitchens. You know, I think that's why I think people, you know, now that they're starting to know who you are, I think you might see more sales of some of your earlier books.
Yes.
So
Does the controversy, does that help sell your books?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, the God Delusion is actually a much gentler book than many people think. It's not a very loud, arrogant, strident book the way people often
No, and it's
describe it.
amazing the level of hatred
I know,
that
yeah.
book draws.
Yes, but if you actually read it, I think many people might be quite surprised at how gentle it actually is.
yeah, the most because well, the most quoted, I think, part of that book is, you know, in the long quote I haven't memorized, but where you say that, you know, the malevolent, you know.
Oh yeah, well that of course is
yeah.
that's almost a joke, but actually it would be very hard to refute that. I mean,
Sure.
you could go through every one of those adjectives, genocidal, filicidal, megalomaniacal, etc., and you could have numerous biblical verses to substantiate every single one of those adjectives.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, there's you know, atheists, there's what is called the Skeptical Annotated Bible, or so.
Skeptics Annotated Bible,
Yes.
which is now in hardcover, by the way.
Yes, now, yeah.
And it's a frequent
They're
resource
great
for
fun,
me.
yes. If only people would read the Bible, they'd soon give up Christianity. But
Every week, kind of as when we're signing off, I'll say, read your Bible.
Yes,
Because
yeah,
I will
yeah.
create atheists.
Yes.
We've got a little less, we've got about a minute and a half. Jump in and say anything you want to say that we haven't asked you yet.
Oh, good heavens, no, I leave that's your job.
Okay.
Say something funny.
So actually, somebody had said, if you were to choose one flavor of gummy bears, what would it be? That's all for eternity. That's what we would do.
I don't even know what a gummy bear is, and I don't think I want to.
No, they're actually pretty delightful.
Okay.
And just real quick, you know, one real quick, and this is really short, but you say you have a lot of religious friends, and do you often find yourself?
Do I?
I thought you mentioned
I'm not sure I
at
have
some
that
point.
many.
Well,
religious
some
friends.
at least. You do have a.
I'm on good terms with just about everybody, and that includes.
As we all should be.
Yes, as we all should be. And I cooperated with bishops in trying to attack creationism. I mean, that's a very serious point, that I and the Bishop of Oxford colluded to get bishops and scientists to attack creationism in British schools.
We've done the same thing with a local church, United Church of Christ, that they are a very liberal church, and they accept evolution and separation of church and state, and so we've done some work with that. So real quick, I want to mention, we're out of time.
Peter Boghossian.
So next week, please join us. Dr. Peter Boghossian will be on the show. He's a professor of philosophy at Portland State College. He'll be here, and with Rob Pensack and David Tamayo. And I want to also urge everybody here to please call in the show. Go to our websites, Facebook, YouTube, just Road to Reason. Thank you very much.